Two friends decided to ride their scooters to the store to treat themselves to something delicious. But this simple outing led to a tragedy that shocked many. Over the years, the case took many unexpected turns that were sometimes hard to understand. The end of this story was completely unpredictable. Michaela Garecht was born on the 24th of January 1979 in Oakland, California. She was the long-awaited first child of the family. The parents tried for 5 years to have a child before they succeeded. Shortly after Michaela's birth, the family was expanded by 2 more children and moved to the quiet suburb of Haywood. This place was peaceful and ideal for the quiet life of a large family. Michaela was a cheerful child, enjoyed playing with her brother and sister, and spent much time with her best friend Katrina. The girls lived almost across from each other and therefore met often and played near their houses. On the 19th of November 1988, she and Katrina ran back and forth between their houses, trying on different costumes for a school performance. Both were in the best mood as the first vacation days for Thanksgiving had begun. Around 10 o'clock in the morning, Catherine's father gave her $5 so she could buy candy. The girls, full of enthusiasm, went to Michaela's house to ask her mother for permission to go to the nearest store, which was less than a kilometer away. Michaela's mother reluctantly agreed, as the girls had never gone to the store before without adults or older friends. But after Michaela's persistent requests, she gave permission, on the condition that they would return home immediately after shopping. Michaela's mother always worried about her safety, as Michaela was her first and long-awaited child, whose birth the parents regarded as a miracle. On this day, the woman decided that nothing bad would happen, as the store was only a few hundred meters from the house and the girls planned to ride there with their scooters. Michaela ran to Catherine to get 2 scooters, hers and her brother's. The friends went to the store, parked the scooters nearby, and went inside to shop. When the girls came out of the store, they began talking and forgot about the scooters. They went home, but quickly remembered the scooters and returned to the place where they had left them. To their surprise, Michaela's scooter was no longer there. They thought someone might have moved it elsewhere and decided to search the area around the store. Michaela walked along the parking lot and soon noticed her scooter next to a car that was parked nearby. She went toward it, but after a few seconds, Catherine heard a loud noise. Catherine ran back and saw how an unknown man was trying to drive away with Michaela. The man quickly got behind the wheel and drove off. Shocked, Catherine ran into the store and told the saleswoman what had happened. The saleswoman immediately called the police, and the officers were on the scene within minutes. Then she called Michaela's father and reported what had occurred. Michaela's father immediately came to the store with Catherine's father, where the investigators were already working. He also told his wife to stay at home next to the telephone and wait for a call from the police. The investigators faced many tasks. It turned out that there were no surveillance cameras near the store, and the only witness was Catherine, who was in shock and could barely speak. So her father took her home. The officers also spoke with the store cashier, who gave the first important information. The woman told them that shortly before the incident, a suspicious man was in front of the store who parked and got out of the car, but did not go inside. Instead of going into the building, a man walked around the building, looked through the windows and observed the passers-by. The cashier noticed his suspicious behavior and thought he was up to something evil. According to her statement, it was a white man, about 30 years old with a large mustache. He drove an old, dark red car, but she could not identify the model and license plate. Based on her information, the police created a composite sketch of the suspect and distributed it in all newspapers and television stations. From the beginning, news of the incident spread throughout the city and beyond. People were shocked that such a thing could happen in the middle of the city in broad daylight. The description of the man and his car was passed to hundreds of patrol officers throughout the district, who then began stopping all similar cars, hoping to find Michaela. The investigators sent the scooter for forensic examination, assuming that the suspect might have noticed Michaela and Katrina when they rode to the store, and intentionally brought one of the scooters to the back door of his car to implement his plan. His fingerprints might have remained on the scooter. The forensic technicians confirmed this assumption by finding a print that did not belong to any of Katrina's family members and clearly did not match Michaela. However, the problem was that the print was incomplete. The experts managed to take only about 10% of the entire print, which significantly complicated the task. In those years, this was not enough to search in databases, and the police could only hope for a direct comparison with suspects. In the evening, the FBI joined the investigation. In Hayward and the surrounding cities, cases of missing persons were accumulating, and they immediately suspected a connection to this case. Despite the FBI's involvement and active media coverage, they could not get closer to solving the case. Michaela's parents were very sad, especially her mother, who blamed herself for what had happened. She remembered a strange detail that troubled her. A week before the disappearance, she woke up early in the morning and saw her daughter at the dining table in the kitchen. This was unusual, as the girl normally did not get up so early. When her mother asked why she was not sleeping, Michaela replied that she was writing a poem, but did not give details as she was very sleepy. After some questions from her mother, she explained that she was awakened by a noise in the attic and decided to write a poem about people who get stuck in attics. Michaela added that her work was dedicated to those who spend a lot of time there. The mother was surprised at the time to hear this from her daughter, but after her disappearance it seemed to be something mystical. The woman concluded that Michaela, without knowing it, predicted her own fate. In the first 2 days after the disappearance, the police did everything to find the suspect or his car and combed through the city, but without success. Then they remembered Katrina, who could barely testify due to shock. After 2 days of searching, they decided it was time to go to her home. There, an unexpected turn awaited them. Katrina, who had seen the incident and the person, gave a completely different description. According to her statement, it was a young man, about 20 years old, with long blonde and dirty hair down to his shoulders and acne on his face. The girl also noticed his blue eyes, which seemed to her like those of a fox. She also remembered features of the car: a beige-colored sedan with straight shapes and many dents. The police officers realized that the cashier had given the description of another person who had behaved suspiciously near the store. Katrina, on the other hand, described a completely different man and a different car, which posed a serious problem for the investigation. Because of this, they had sent a false composite sketch to all media and patrol officers, causing everyone to search for the wrong person. These mistakes happened in the first 48 hours, the most important time for solving the case. Based on Katrina's description, a new composite sketch was created and sent out again. The police also began searching for men with criminal records in this area. Dozens of volunteers joined the search, combing through houses and questioning residents. Thousands of flyers with Michaela's photo and a description of the situation were distributed. In the first days alone, 42,000 flyers were distributed. A few days later, they received the first important clue. 3 people who were hiking in the large national park near the city made contact with the police. The experienced hikers noticed tracks on the ground and recognized that one pair of shoes belonged to an adult and the other to a child. When they followed these, they found a blanket and empty fast food packaging in the middle of the forest. The police suspected that the tracks might belong to Michaela. A psychological profile created by FBI experts also indicated that the perpetrator would probably choose the most remote location possible, considering the size of the park and its proximity to the city. This location fit perfectly with this theory. The investigators decided to search the park with all available resources. They combed through the area on foot while helicopters with thermal imaging cameras searched the area from the air. However, these measures brought no results. They could find neither Michaela nor any evidence. The police continued searching other parks, mountains, and remote locations, but without success. At the same time, due to the nationwide reporting on the case, an enormous amount of tips came in. In the first month of the investigation alone, about 4,000 tips were received. The investigators tried to check each one of them, which was extremely difficult. The case was discussed particularly intensively in San Francisco and the surrounding cities. Even well-known athletes made appeals to the public and asked for information to support the police. Soon, a substantial reward of $70,000 was offered, and Michaela's photo appeared on 1 million milk cartons throughout the state. Despite the broad participation of society and the multitude of tips, the investigators could make no progress. At the end of December, 1.5 months after the beginning of the search, the police admitted that the only result was that several thousand tips had been checked. Since then, the situation remained unchanged. Over many months, the police continued to receive numerous tips and followed up on them. Even the girl's mother conducted her own investigations by studying similar cases and trying to find out who could have committed the crime. Everyone hoped that the case would be solved and Michaela would return home. In the year 1991, the investigators directed their attention to Timothy Binder, who was then 43 years old. With each new detail about him, an increasingly disturbing picture emerged. Even before the story with Michaela, this man was already in the police's sights. They noticed that he sent gifts, letters, and money to many girls. In some letters were Bible quotes with underlined sentences like, "I have chosen you," and "be with me." Some parents of the girls turned to the police, and Binder was questioned. He claimed he only wanted to build friendly relationships. During the investigation, it turned out that he had been dismissed from social services in Colorado in 1985 because he had collected addresses and personal information of clients to whom he later sent gifts and letters. The police officers searched his van and found many photos and Bible excerpts distributed throughout the interior. It turned out that the man had already been arrested for wanting to invite someone into his van, but no charges were filed. Binder also frequently visited cemeteries and spent much time there. Even more disturbing facts came to light when it became known that half a year before Michaela's case, a girl named Amber had disappeared near their city. Binder made contact with her mother, offered help, and often visited her at home. He also wrote a letter to the police in which he predicted what might happen roughly to whom in the next similar crime. A few months later, this was confirmed in Michaela's case. With the beginning of the search actions, Binder frequently called Michaela's mother, visited her at home, and offered help. In December 1988, he sent a Christmas card to an FBI profiler showing a girl holding up 4 fingers. A few weeks later, he again guessed the age of the next missing girl. Despite the series of strange facts that led to indirect evidence, the investigators obtained a search warrant for his house where he lived with his wife. However, they found no evidence linking him to the crimes. When information about Binder's suspicious behavior reached the newspapers, the public began blaming him for all similar cases in the city. This made his life difficult, and he and his family sued the city authorities for defamation and won the case. The police monitored him for several more months, but finally concluded that they could not connect him to any crime. Some investigators believed that his behavior was strange, but not dangerous. As a result, the police focused on searching for other suspects. A new serious clue did not emerge until December 1992, 4 years after Michaela's case. An inmate from Indiana serving an 11-year sentence contacted the police and claimed he knew who had committed this crime. He explained that he had helped hide evidence in the park where tracks were later found. At first, the investigators paid no attention to this, but the inmate wrote a letter to one of the leading newspapers in San Francisco. After the publication of his story, the police were heavily criticized. Under public pressure, they decided to interrogate the inmate after all, who promised not only to show the location of the evidence, but also to lead them to the culprit. He was brought to California and went to the location together with the police. The inmate claimed the evidence was buried in a gladiolus field, and the officers concentrated all their efforts on this area. The search lasted from 8 o'clock in the morning until the inmate suddenly admitted that he had made everything up. He explained that he had wanted to give Michaela's family comfort and the opportunity to move on. Instead, the girl's relatives and the police became angry. The inmate received an additional 6.5 years in prison, extending his sentence to almost 20 years. Additionally, he was required to pay Michaela's family compensation of $6,000. The next suspect emerged in August 2000. The police arrested Curtis Anderson, who was suspected of a similar crime that had been committed a year earlier in Vallejo. He confessed his guilt and was sent to prison, but the investigators suspected that he might also be involved in other cases. This was not confirmed for 7 years until Curtis contacted the FBI. The man, who suffered from serious health problems, explained that he wanted to confess to additional crimes. According to his statements, he was involved in 13 other incidents that took place at different times. One of them concerned Amber, who had disappeared half a year before Michaela. Curtis provided enough precise details that the investigators concluded he was indeed involved. However, it was not possible to prove his guilt since no physical evidence was found. Regarding Michaela, Curtis denied his involvement, although he drove a car in those years that matched Katrina's description. FBI agents planned to continue the interrogations but had difficulties with Curtis. A new suspect emerged in the year 2012. The police received information from an inmate who claimed his cellmate, Lauren Herzog, looked very similar to the composite sketch of the suspect in Michaela's case. The investigators showed interest since Lauren and his accomplice were already in prison for other crimes. They were suspected in 19 cases, but only some of them could be proven. A month before Lauren's cellmate went to the police, the same thing had happened to Lauren as to Curtis, but the investigators nevertheless decided to check his involvement. Young photos of Lauren indeed resembled the composite sketch, but additional evidence was required. It was decided to excavate a well where Lauren and his accomplice had hidden evidence. They found several thousand objects that were examined by experts. It turned out that this evidence was connected to the cases of 5 other girls, but none of them matched Michaela's DNA samples. After examining additional wells, the police again found no evidence of Lauren's involvement. A new clue emerged in the year 2018. David Mitch was accused of a crime that was committed in the year 1986 near Michaela's place of residence. Suspicion fell on Mitch thanks to modern DNA analysis technologies. After the incident, biological material was found under the fingernails of 2 girls that could not be examined at the time. Only in our time was an analysis carried out that connected Mitch to these cases. At the time of the new accusations, Mitch was already in prison. The investigators decided to check his involvement in the Michaela case. They found out that David was in the same area at the time of the incident. He also matched Katrina's description and owned a similar car. Since his fingerprints were in the database, the experts decided to re-examine the partial print from Michaela's scooter. Although the print only made up 10% of the whole, they achieved a breakthrough in the case with modern technologies. The print from the scooter matched completely with Mitch's fingerprints. In the year 2020, a man was seriously charged, as the hope of finding Michaela had almost expired. He categorically refused to acknowledge his guilt, and the case was brought to court. At the beginning of 2023, preliminary hearings took place in which the judge decided that the evidence against Mitch was sufficient to start the trial. Mitch's lawyer tried to challenge the evidence and claimed that the fingerprint on the scooter did not prove his client's involvement in the crime. However, this claim seemed questionable, as the scooter was intentionally placed at the back door of the car to create a false impression. The lawyer also disputed the first-degree charge and explained that the absence of key evidence meant the absence of proof. But this claim is no longer relevant today. Previously, such charges without key evidence were rare. But today, the approach has changed. When sufficient indirect evidence exists, one can be almost certain that a tragic outcome occurred. Furthermore, Mitch showed a tendency toward criminal acts throughout his entire life. The girl's father traveled from another state to participate in the press conference at which Mitch's arrest was announced. Michaela's mother, who had hoped all these years to find her daughter, could not come due to serious health problems. She could not participate in the court proceedings, but thanked the investigators for their persistence and finding the truth despite the long years. The police explained that they would continue to search for key evidence and offered a reward of $10,000 for any useful information. Soon the trial against Mitch is to begin, which encompasses 3 cases. The Michaela case and 2 girls under whose fingernails his DNA was found. Initially, the prosecution planned to impose a strict sentence, but then the district attorney changed in this jurisdiction. The new prosecutor, Pamela Price, changed the decision. Now Mitch, even if he is found guilty in all 3 cases, no longer faces a life sentence, but only several decades in prison. This decision caused displeasure among the relatives and became a controversial topic in the media, and the only supporter was Mitch's lawyer. However, since the man is already 62 years old, he has little chance of getting out of prison. On a warm May evening in the year 1991, as the city prepared for Memorial Day celebrations, a mysterious incident occurred at the local fair. A 5-year-old boy seemed to have dissolved into thin air, leaving his family in despair. Despite extensive search operations, no traces of the child could be found. Over time, the investigation ran aground, but years later, an unexpected turn brought light to this mysterious story. The story began long before this incident. Michelle Lazinski, a native of New Jersey, grew up in a family with 3 siblings. At 16, when she visited her older brother in the small town of Walker, she met George Whitney. Their relationship developed quickly, and just a year later, on the 6th of August 1985, when Michelle had just turned 17, their son Timothy was born, lovingly called Timmy. However, the family idyll did not last long. Half a year after the baby's birth, Michelle moved with the child to her sister in the south of the state. She dropped out of school and began taking poorly paid jobs to support herself and her son. Soon, the young mother moved into her own apartment to combine work and care for Timmy. Michelle's life was not easy. She had difficulties in her private life, as many men were not ready to take responsibility for another person's child. The situation worsened in early 1990 when Michelle's sister and brother-in-law, her main helpers in caring for Timmy, moved to another state. For Michelle, it became even more difficult to meet her obligations. She was often late for work and sometimes took her son with her. When Timmy entered elementary school, he also had problems with school attendance and punctuality. Despite the difficulties in life, Michelle was known as a caring and attentive mother. She always tried to provide her son with everything necessary and had even saved money for his education at the prestigious private school, St. Maria. On Friday, the 25th of May, 1991, one day before Memorial Day, Michelle planned to participate with her 5-year-old Timmy in the celebrations at Kennedy Park in the neighboring town of Cy Ariel. The day was supposed to begin with morning shopping and end in the evening with a visit to the carnival together with her son and her little niece. However, the evening went differently than planned. Michelle arrived at the carnival around 19:30 without her niece and had not informed the child's mother about the change of plans. According to Michelle, she lost sight of Timmy when she was briefly distracted to buy a drink. Michelle met her 13-year-old niece, Jennifer Blair, and her friend at the carnival and told them with concern what had happened. Soon after, all 3 found themselves at the police station reporting the boy's disappearance. The police recognized the seriousness of the situation and immediately began a large-scale search. Despite the combined efforts of the police, fire department, dog teams, and many volunteers, Timmy could not be found either on the carnival grounds or in the surrounding area. The search operation lasted until late at night, after which it was interrupted until morning. With the first rays of sun, efforts to find the missing person were resumed with new strength. More than 300 volunteers combed through the park and surrounding areas. Air and water resources were deployed. By noon, the investigators concluded that further search operations in this area were hopeless. On the day of the incident, law enforcement thoroughly searched Michelle's car and house, hoping to find any clues, but without success. In parallel, the investigators questioned Timmy's father and Michelle's former companions. However, all 3 were excluded from the circle of suspects due to unassailable confirmations of their whereabouts at the time of the incident. The questioning of staff and visitors of the festival event yielded no significant results. A group of teenagers claimed to have seen someone who resembled the description of the missing person until his disappearance. One witness reported that she had spoken with Michelle shortly before the incident, and that she was alone at that time. The boy's photo appeared on milk cartons, which normally carry information about missing children. The investigators were puzzled how a child could disappear unnoticed in such a dense crowd. The situation took an unexpected turn after a conversation with the missing person's mother. Michelle reported that she had left her son around 7 in the evening in the line to buy a drink, and when she returned, he was already gone. She also told that before visiting the festival, they had played football and visited a petting zoo. Although the place where Michelle's son allegedly disappeared was not accessible that day according to official information, questioning of friends and neighbors yielded no results. Nobody had seen the boy that morning. About a week after the incident, Michelle spoke with the investigators again. She repeated her original story about how she had lost sight of Timmy when she went to get a drink. But just a few days later, her version suddenly changed. In her new narrative, Michelle mentioned 2 strangers, an older and a younger man who had allegedly taken Timmy away. She claimed she had tried to intervene, but the older man had threatened to harm the boy. But that same evening, Michelle came to the police station and confessed that she had invented this story under the pressure of public expectations. But the series of strange statements did not end there. The next day, in another conversation with the investigators, Michelle presented a completely new version of events. Now a certain Ellen appeared in her story, a woman whom Michelle knew from her work at the bank. According to Michelle, Ellen, accompanied by 2 men and a woman, offered to watch Timmy while his mother got a drink. When Michelle returned, she found that everyone, including her son, had disappeared. As an explanation for why she had not told this earlier, Michelle cited her fear for her family's safety. These constant changes in her statements only complicated the case and left the investigators unclear about what had really happened to Timmy. During the investigation of little Timotheus's mysterious disappearance, the law enforcement agencies decided to resort to an unusual method. They asked Michelle's former partner to secretly record her conversation with the boy's mother, but this attempt did not bring the hoped-for results. Michelle merely repeated the already told story about a certain Ellen. A week later, another conversation with Michelle took place. This time she supplemented her story with new details and mentioned an unpleasant incident with a stranger. The investigators, who doubted the truth of her words, decided to use a trick. They told her about a group of criminals allegedly active in the area whose methods matched those she had described. Michelle, who fell for this trick, said that Timotheus might possibly be brought back within a month, provided she remained silent. But when the investigators began to clarify details, Michelle suddenly broke off the conversation and left the room. This interview strengthened the suspicions against Michelle, especially after she failed the lie detector test twice. After that, she refused further cooperation with the investigators. Despite contradictory statements, there was no concrete evidence against her, and the investigation continued in all possible directions. 5 months after Timotheus's disappearance, there was an unexpected turn. Local teacher Dan O'Malley discovered children's shoes in Hunter Park that resembled those the boy wore on the day of his disappearance. When this discovery was shown to Michelle, she initially denied the similarity to her son's shoes. But after the information reached the press and attracted public attention, Michelle suddenly changed her mind and admitted that they could be Timotheus's shoes. The police conducted a thorough investigation of the discovery site but could not find any further clues. This event once again drew public attention to little Timotheus's mysterious disappearance, but unfortunately did not bring the investigation closer to solving the mystery. Almost a year after the mysterious disappearance, the investigation team decided to search again the place where the shoe had previously been found. To everyone's surprise, they almost immediately discovered a second shoe near the first find. As they continued the search, they came upon something that made their hearts stand still. remains that presumably belonged to the sought person. Next to this sad find lay a shovel, pillowcases, a large blue blanket, and other objects. The condition of the remains did not allow determining the exact cause of what had happened, but experts confirmed that they belonged to the missing person. When the investigators informed Michelle about the find, her reaction, or rather the lack of one, caused confusion among them. At the same time, the relatives and the local community were deeply shaken by this news. After this discovery, the investigation took a new turn. The investigators questioned Timmy's father and 2 former partners of Michelle again, but none of them aroused suspicion. A mysterious woman named Ellen could also not be found. As a result, attention turned again to the boy's mother, Michelle. Her behavior raised questions. She constantly changed her version of events and failed the lie detector test twice. Many noticed that her emotional reactions did not fit the situation. She could laugh inappropriately during an interview. Once journalists asked her directly why she showed hardly any emotions about her son's disappearance. She said, "I do not consider it necessary to show my feelings publicly just because someone expects it." This attitude triggered different reactions among people. After Timati's disappearance, concerned people founded the Friends Fund to collect money for his search. Initially, Michelle supported this initiative and even participated in the fund's board. The first fundraising event took place at the Catholic school that Timati attended. At Michelle's suggestion, dancers were invited for the evening, which caused displeasure among many. People considered it inappropriate for a Catholic school and for the purpose of the event. Despite the criticism, Michelle insisted on this format for the next fundraising event. When the fund's board rejected this idea, she left the board. Additionally, she prohibited the fund through her lawyer from using any images of Timati, which shocked everyone involved in the search. Notably, the location where Timati's traces were found was near the office park where Michelle had previously worked. She did not mention this fact in her interviews. Also, her vacation in the Bahamas some months after her son's disappearance, where she was recognized by police officers vacationing there, raised questions. On the day when the evidence related to Timati was found, the police received an anonymous letter. It pointed to a person who might have been involved in the incident due to a grudge against Michelle. This information added a new twist to the investigation and left many questions unanswered. The investigators became attentive due to an unusual detail. The name Michelle was misspelled. This made them think of a possible staging. It was assumed that Michelle might have made this mistake intentionally to deflect suspicion from herself. Experts carefully examined the message for biological traces, but found nothing that was connected to Michelle or other known persons. Despite a series of suspicious circumstances related to Michelle, the law enforcement agencies had no solid evidence that connected her to the incident. The investigation reached a dead end, and Michelle, meanwhile, moved to her brother in the neighboring town to avoid press attention. 2 years later, in the year 1994, Michelle was again in the center of attention, however under very unexpected circumstances. She reported to her relatives that she was being followed. One day her brother found Michelle's car with the door open in which her glasses and her handbag lay. When searching the vehicle, the police found only one strange thing: a business card of an FBI agent with the inscription on the back, "We will see each other soon." This is not the end yet. Extensive search operations began, but unexpectedly Michelle contacted the police herself. She claimed that she had been kidnapped and then released in Detroit, 1,000 kilometers from her home. According to her statement, 2 persons who posed as FBI agents forced her into a car and brought her to Detroit, where she was later released. However, the FBI was very skeptical of this story. The business card found in Michelle's car turned out to be a forgery. Later, the law enforcement agencies found out an interesting detail. Michelle's call to the station was made from a phone booth near the Grey Hope bus station. There, she also bought a ticket for the bus from New York to Detroit. This circumstance confused the investigators but confirmed their doubts about Michelle's honesty and her willingness to deceive. The consequences did not take long. Michelle pleaded guilty to giving false information to federal authorities and misusing the official stamp. She was sentenced to 6 months of house arrest and 3 years on probation. In search of a new beginning, Michelle moved to her brother in Minnesota. There she started a family and had 2 sons. But in the year 1997, she again came into the crosshairs of the law because she had stolen a computer from her former employer, for which she received another probationary sentence. 3 years later, her marriage broke up, and she moved with her children to her older sister in Florida. All these years, Michelle kept photos of Timmy and told her other children about their older brother. The Timothy case remained unsolved for a long time, despite occasional announcements by the prosecutor's office to resume the investigation. The situation changed in early 2010 when a new investigator decided to look at the case with fresh eyes. He noticed that some evidence found at the crime scene had never been shown to Michelle's relatives, particularly blankets and pillowcases. The investigators focused on the blanket, as they suspected it might have come from Michelle's house. They searched through old photos of the apartment but found no similar blanket. 20 years later, the investigators began questioning everyone who might recognize the blanket. The breakthrough came when Michelle's niece Jennifer Blair came to the station. Without knowing why she had been called, she immediately recognized the worn blanket on the table and explained that it came from Timmy's house. On the 6th of August 2014, on the day when Timmy would have turned 29 years old, Michelle was arrested. The trial began on the 16th of March 2016, almost a quarter century after the incident. The blanket became the decisive evidence, and Jennifer became the main witness. Later, 2 other women who knew the family confirmed that the blanket actually came from Timmy's house. The investigators suspected that the young mother was in a difficult life situation, as she tried to reconcile caring for her child with her private life and career. She often changed jobs and seemed to find no stability in her relationships. One of the key moments in the case was a blanket that was found in Michelle's house. This object aroused special interest among the investigators. Likewise, the fact that Michelle had previously worked near the location where important findings for the case were made attracted attention. Witness statements added new details to what had happened. One woman claimed to have seen Michelle without her child at a carnival. Michelle's ex-partner told of an unpleasant incident with a neighbor's dog, after which Timothy needed medical help. He also expressed doubts about Michelle's readiness for family life, which led to their separation. The investigators paid attention to changes in Michelle's stories and her unusual behavior during the search for her son. However, the defense insisted that Michelle loved Timothy very much and was not the person the prosecution was trying to portray. The lawyers emphasized that all evidence against Michelle was only indirect. Michelle's case caused much discussion in legal circles. Her lawyer emphasized the lack of direct evidence. There was no confession, no scientific evidence, and no objects that connected her to the incident. Michelle's care for her son and her behavior shortly before his disappearance did not fit, according to the lawyer, the image of a person capable of such an act. Witnesses who recognized an important detail, the blanket, possibly gave their statements out of sympathy for Michelle or due to prejudice from the broad media coverage of the case. Despite these arguments, the jury concluded that Michelle was involved in this case. The punishment for such an act ranged from 30 years to life imprisonment. The lawyer pleaded for the minimum sentence and claimed that the son would not want his mother to be sentenced so harshly. On the 5th of January 2017, 49-year-old Michelle was sentenced to 30 years in prison. After the verdict was announced, a new lawyer joined the defense team. He explained that he intended to challenge the verdict and claimed that the case had been brought to court without sufficient evidence. All appeals were rejected until the case landed before the Supreme Court of New Jersey. Of 7 judges, 1 withdrew because he had previously worked in the prosecutor's office during Michelle's son's disappearance. The remaining 6 judges were evenly split. In such cases, the original decision normally stands. The lawyers representing Michelle insisted that the disagreement violated her right to a fair trial. they turned to the highest judicial authority with a request to review the case. In an unusual step, they brought in a judge from a subordinate court to render a verdict in this unprecedented case. To general surprise, the verdict fell in favor of Michelle. In the final decision, it was stated that never before had convictions been pronounced on the basis of such shaky evidence. Two factors were decisive for the decision. First, the judge had serious doubts about the witness statements. Second, for a conviction, it would have been necessary to prove that the person had acted consciously and deliberately, which seemed impossible in this case, as the circumstances of the incident remained unclear. The judge emphasized that the 23-year-old single mother was often confronted with financial and social difficulties, and this situation represented nothing extraordinary. Such a scenario could hardly serve as an indication of a motive for such an act. On the 28th of December 2012, Michelle's verdict was overturned, and she was released after 5 years in prison. According to law, a person may not be held accountable twice for the same act. This means that Michelle can no longer be brought to trial in this matter, even if new evidence should emerge.